Hi everyone, it's Christopher Credit, and today for our sixth lesson, you are going to learn all about financial responsibility and how to avoid debt. Although we've been learning a lot about investing, in order to be a successful investor, you must become familiar with good practices such as staying out of debt. This week, we'll begin by reviewing important terms for lesson 6, go over banking basics, checking accounts, ways to save, credit, loans, and credit unions. By the end of this week, you should be able to learn how to build healthy financial habits and how to avoid debt, describe the functions of a bank, understand the importance of managing personal finance, understand and write a check, and explain the different types of loans. Now, use what you learned in lessons 4 and 5 to complete the flash review worksheet on page 6.1 of your student workbook. After you finish answering the questions, turn to your weekly reflection sheet and complete that as well. Welcome back. Now we will go over important vocabulary for lesson 6. Follow along on page 6.3 of your student workbook as I define each term. Our first term is credit. For example, my uncle was able to borrow enough from the bank to buy a new house because he has good credit. What do you think credit means? Credit is trust that you will pay back the money that is lent to you. Our next term is credit union. For example, my parents were able to buy a car easily because they borrowed money from the credit union they belonged to. What do you think credit union means? A credit union is a pool of money similar to a bank in which members can deposit and borrow money at a low interest rate. Our next term is loan. For example, most college students take out a loan to pay for their tuition. What do you think loan means? A loan is a sum of money that is borrowed from someone to be paid back over a set amount of time. Our last term is mortgage. For example, during the recession, many people lost their jobs and had to take out a mortgage on their house as a result. What do you think mortgage means? A mortgage is a loan to buy a house, normally low interest and tied to the property. Now that we have reviewed important vocabulary for this lesson, let's put it to good use. First, let's learn more about banking. A bank is an institution that deals with the storage, transfer, and loaning of money. Your family may keep money in the bank. Can you list any of these banks from their logos? Why do you think some families use banks? Discuss some of these things with your class. Now that you have discussed, let's go a bit more in depth on banking. There are 4 basic functions of a bank. These are checking, savings, credit, and loans. First, let's talk about checking accounts. Putting your money into a checking account is a very safe investment. A checking account is a safe way to keep your money in the bank, and you have easy access through checks or your debit card. A check is a signed piece of paper which you give to someone, issuing them a certain amount of money from your account. A debit card is a card that you use instead of cash. It withdraws a pre-deposited money from your checking account. It is a way to pay for things immediately without carrying cash on you. Today, less checks are written due to the convenience of debit cards and online apps that make it easy to transfer money from one person to another. However, checks are still necessary for some things and keeps people from carrying around a large sum of money that could easily be lost or stolen. What do you think the advantages are of keeping money in a checking account versus carrying cash? Discuss this with your class. Now we're going to discuss the parts of a check and how to write a check. Follow along with me by looking at the sample check on page 6.4 of your student workbook while I explain each part of the check. The upper left-hand corner of a check should include the owner of the checking account's name and address. The number in the upper right-hand corner is the check number. It helps the writer of the check to keep record of the checks he or she has written. The top line in the middle of the check is where the date on which you wrote the check goes. The top line of the check is where you write to whom the check should be paid. The second line is where you write out in letters the amount of money on the check. The box on the right-hand side of the check is where you write out in digits the amount of money on the check. The line on the bottom left-hand side is for the purpose of the check, sometimes called the memo. The line at the bottom right is where the check writer's signature goes. Now that we have discussed each part of the check, let's practice writing one. Turn to page 6.4 in your student workbook and use what you just learned to fill out a check with the help of your teacher. Hi again, let's move on to savings now. We've discussed savings before. A savings account is a special bank account that allows you to loan your money to the bank, and the bank in turn pays you interest. Now think of something big that you would love to have. Maybe it's a bike, a vacation, or maybe even a boat. How much does it cost? How much money would you have to save to buy it? And how long do you think it would take? Turn to page 6.5 of your student workbook to jot down your response. Before we move on, here are some quick definitions for debt and credit. The services we are discussing today are offered to help you manage your money. It is very important to stay on top of this responsibility so you can avoid going into debt and maintain good credit. After reading the definitions of debt and credit, why do you think it is important to have good credit and stay out of debt? After you discuss this, work on the Managing Your Bank Account math activity on page 6.5 of your student handbook. Let's talk about another service that's offered through the bank, a loan. Remember, a loan is a sum of money that is borrowed from someone else to be paid back over time. There are many types of loans. Some include auto loans, mortgages, personal loans, business loans, and student loans. Cars are expensive, so an auto loan is money borrowed to buy a car. You pay some of the money back each month, but if you fall behind in your payments, you could lose the car. Houses are even more expensive. A mortgage is a loan to buy a house. You pay back a certain amount each month for several years, normally with low interest. But again, if you fall behind in your payments, you could lose the house. Student loans are loans people take out to pay for college. They are federal loans, which are granted by the government, usually at a low interest rate, and private loans, which are loans through private companies at higher interest rates. Personal loans are loans you can take out for almost anything, including a vacation, a new condo, or paying off debt. Business loans are normally very large loans intended to help you start or grow your business. Now that you've learned about all kinds of loans, get into small groups and perform a skit regarding loans. One student should be the loan officer who will either grant or decline the loan. Loan officers work for the bank and make the determination based on the client's credit. For example, someone with bad credit asking for a large loan to start a business would probably be declined. But someone with good credit who pays their bills on time asking for a loan to buy a car would likely be accepted. For this activity, make sure to state the type of loan and describe the credit history of the person asking for the loan. Now let's talk about paying off loans. There are many methods for paying them off quickly, but one thing to keep in mind is interest rates. Interest is the extra money a bank charges customers when they borrow money. Different types of loans have different interest rates. When paying off loans, it is important to pay off the loans with the highest interest rates first. Next is credit unions. A credit union is a pool of money similar to a bank where members can deposit and borrow money at low interest rates. The difference between a credit union and a bank is that a credit union is like a club. You have to be a member to reap the benefits. Many jobs and organizations provide special membership to credit unions. There is probably a credit union in your area. Here again is the Jack the Builder activity on page 6.11 of your student workbooks. You're familiar with this model. This is an opportunity for you to take home and share what you've learned with your parents or guardians about these important topics. Make sure to read each box and take this activity home to complete pages 6.8 through 6.11 with a member of your family. You should all act as the teachers, teaching your family member what you've learned in this week's lesson. Thank you so much for having me today. I had a great time teaching you so much about banks and how they work. This is Christopher Credit signing off.